Okay, so super quick recap. Since I shouldn't be making this, I am not dead. The channel is not dead. I'm back at law school, and I have a lot going on right now. I'm also doing some paid, analyst and writing stuff for Warcraft. I'm doing good. It's doing good. So I have a script here, which we're going to talk through. Again, this is going to be very minimal production value because I am just trying to get this out. I cannot make this a project right now. But a few hours ago, we got our first glimpse of the Monk Dragonflight talents via Wowhead. The tree is incomplete and seemingly has a few errors in it. So we aren't holding on too tightly to any specific element, but the broad strokes of the tree have been made clear, and I feel confident describing my concerns based on what we have in front of us. With that said, I recognize that this is a visceral reaction, but this feedback is best made sooner rather than later. Venruki actually has the opposite opinion. His tweet reads like he's buzzing with excitement about this tree. So take this for what it is. One fuckwit's opinion raced out the door without a ton of reflection. I love my Windwalker monk, but I often feel like I love the idea of it more than the class that is in front of me. I was quite a late adopter of Windwalker, picking it up in late Legion. By then, talents like Serenity were stories I heard, not things I ever really played. At the core of my criticism about modern Windwalker is this question. What is the class fantasy of Windwalker, and how does it parallel or contrast the actual gameplay of the spec? In its earliest form, Windwalker was an adaptation of fighting games, so stuff like the fighting game combo. In the broad strokes, this involved a large variety of damage dealing abilities with a variety of talents and procs that would shuffle the spell priority, the big example being Combo Breaker. If we have a quick squiz at some old mob gameplay, you can see a lot of different inputs being made, and the source of damage is actually quite varied. Windwalker in mob was actually very opaque with how its damage was dealt. There is no Zuan, no Stormearth and Fire, there's barely any cooldowns at all really. They just do a lot of damage with their kicks and whatever. MMO Champion's Mop Windwalker guide calls the proper rotation Nightmare mode. While I won't say that the rotation has been made easier over the years, the modern Windwalker rotation definitely has less moving parts. So super quick, just to drive this point, again, this cannot be a project. Here is a clip from Lightning 2, a video of a 3k Windwalker in the last season of Mop. We're going to do a quick run through of the final seconds of this mage's life just to see what the Windwalker does to contribute to the kill. They've just forced Ice Block out on the mage. That is worth mentioning just to contextualize that the damage has been done. So if this were Shadowlands, forcing the Ice Block would represent the end of the go. That would be the target here. The Windwalker then gets a triple fist on the enemy team, which doesn't do much offensively, but it does save this bloke's life. The Shadow Priest then lands a triple fear. So let's watch the Windwalker's inputs from this point forward. Disable, Rushing Jade Winds, Tiger's Lust, Medallion on the Ring of Frost, Tiger Eye Brew, Rising Sun Kick, Chi Wave, Chi Brew, Rushing Jade Winds, Blackout Kick, Touch of Death. If it were not for the single RSK in the middle of it, this clip would be unintelligible to a modern Windwalker. A kill forced with nothing but junk spells from the bottom of Icy Veins' current guide. This is a reflection of a broader change in the game. As time has gone on, the model of resource generation and resource dumping has become the standard, and though Windwalker arguably is the model example of that kind of design, the spec has been subtly but profoundly altered in the time since Mop. The generators have had their damage reduced, solidifying them as solely pressed to fuel the bigger buttons, and the spenders have gotten bigger to feel powerful and sexy. So Tiger Palm goes from being worth, say, 40% of an average RSK to being worth 10%. As more emphasis has been put on the big three, Rising Sun Kick, Fists of Fury, and Whirling Dragon Punch, we've seen these abilities chain together to create a pressure point within the duration of a leg sweep.
That's it, letting it, double stun.
This ultimately isn't that far removed from how something like a Rep Paladin plays in a comp like Cupid, carrying resources and damage into a stun window for maximum efficiency. And for whatever reason, the class also has seen an increase in emphasis on pets. Stormearth and Fire was initially some sort of answer to Monk Cleave that was very buggy and unpopular for a number of years. Its current iteration is quite bizarre and relies on a conduit to contradict the ability's express purpose. Like it's meant to be about Cleave, about hitting 3 separate guys. If you look at the old guide here, it tells you that you use the guy to hit a second target. So when you only have 2 guys, you still press the single target rotation, but you have the 2 guys. And you can kind of see how they'd end up doing this kind of thing. But the conduit is about putting it on the same guy again. So this is in opposition to the intent of the button. If the button isn't working, why is it still hit? This can't be a project. This Likewise, Zuen was an unpopular talent that saw very little play until it was baked into the core Windwalker kit in BFA. Like it or not, we were kind of stuck with it. As time has gone on, we've seen Windwalker start to be balanced around the leg sweep setups and given tools designed to synergize with it. Rather than moving away from this damage profile, it has become entrenched.
Here we go.
Yeah, I stun more. I've
proc more. Okay, fine. We can just do our damn. Necro Windwalker is the logical conclusion of this process. Windwalkers are built around forcing as much damage into the leg sweep setups as possible. Anything that doesn't further that aim in some way is irrelevant. Their damage is negligible outside of these setups. Necro Windwalkers are the petty kings of scripted setups in an expansion where every DPS relies on scripted setups. Necro Windwalker at its core is an unpleasant spec to play. It incentivizes perverse and unhealthy strategies and is deeply fucked to play against. As an example, let's talk about how Necro Windwalkers build their character. Haste is the universal good feeling stat. When a class feels bad, generally Haste fixes it. Haste can make any spec more enjoyable because more things happening is fun. That is the universal law there. If we take a peek at Murloc, we can see what the top Windwalkers are doing. The average amount of haste being used by the top 50 Windwalkers is 56. That's 2% haste. But realistically, a good portion of them are actually running 0 haste. Haste does not meaningfully impact Necro Windwalker's leg sweep setup and thus is considered a dead stat. So players build their character to avoid haste at all costs, so the spec feels no better than it did 2 seasons ago. Kiefer's Skyreach took Tiger Palm, our low damage source of chi generation, and made it the core of our burst damage. Most DPS specs have some sort of white noise in their rotation, something that you can press mindlessly in an instant while glancing at Omnibar or whatever, generating combo points in the split second before the real action is taken. Kiefer's denies us that, taking literally our most simple input and making it a 60-second commitment. It's not just a matter of punching the other target between your goes, you have to know the other guy will not be a viable swap target in the next minute. If you commit to just punching the other guy, you are limiting your options for the next minute. Your ability to win the game has been in some way reduced. Sorry, sweep down.
Oh, blind on the reverse.
Yeah, I get in caps, that was trinket there.
Oh god.
I drink something to win. Okay, I drink maybe too much.
On the hill.
Yeah. Nice, dude. Nice. In practice, the safest thing to do is to generate your chi off pets, which brings us to Dance Procs and Mark of the Crane. Windwalkers are rewarded for punching unique targets, to encourage swapping between targets in an AoE situation. Through Dance of Chi-Ji and Mark, Windwalkers are able to build up absurd damage bonuses on their AoE filler ability and turn it into a massive source of single target burst. So the lead up to a Windwalker setup involves running around punching every slime and dog you can find to build up your stacks of Mark, while fishing for a dance proc, rather than actually hitting the fucking guy you intend to kill, or even a player in general for that matter. G'day, it's 1am editing choice here. I just wanted to show you this clip of Avengers doing a solo shuffle, just to demonstrate how the best players generate and spend their chi. So you'll notice that Ven only presses Tiger Palm on a player twice in this entire round. In both times it's to proc on a given player. Otherwise he's just focusing on using these, his Black Hat kicks and Tiger Palm on the various ghoulies and other bits floating around. And when he does decide to actually go on his kill target, which is of course the Death Knight, it's not so much that he's he wants to go, but he's just kind of sick of the game and he wants to end it. So he's pretty much in first gear right now, and he just destroys this poor Death Knight. Just has no idea what's even happening here. This is quite tragic, really. At the absolute worst, it lends itself to a kind of full drive-by strat, wherein a monk will do a 5-second setup and then look to avoid combat for the next 55 seconds. There is a perverse joy to that, and there is a perverse joy to be had in deleting a resto druid with no barkskin or trinket in 2 seconds. But otherwise, it's deeply unenjoyable, for me at least. Meanwhile, on the enemy team, the Windwalker's damage is shockingly predictable, but reliant on finding a condition where players can't respond. The concept of cooldown trading is laid bare in its purest form. If you have an answer and survive, or you simply die. Okay, got a proc.
Do you want to put on the Holy Priest?
Sure.
Cutting her out.
Yep, stun. Go. Okay, we got trinket
Okay,
there.
so we got double trinkets and fade there.
Sometime later. Look, this isn't a project. This is the best you get, alright? I'm trying.
So can we get... Oh, actually, I'm going to wait. I'm going to hold it. I'm stunned anyway.
He faded nothing, dude. What the... I knock them both off.
No, they're all knocked you
Yeah,
off.
Okay.
I'm healing.
I'm stunned. I go right now. Go. In Season 2, when this was at its most intense, there were numerous situations where the game was absolutely sealed 50 seconds in advance. I don't think even RMP has win conditions as certain and as telegraphed as Necro Windwalker and Moonkin did in Season 2 of this expansion. Necro Windwalker as an archetype is extremely good. The ability to execute anyone in a single stun if unimpeded gives flexibility and certainty. You can punch mistakes, you can take initiative for most of the game, and you only really need to be good for 5 seconds at a time. But at the same time, it sucks to know that the game lives or dies on those 5-second windows. And this is to say nothing of what this sort of burst does to the new player experience. That's a whole separate thing. But it really is the fantasy element, the aesthetic, that stings. Necro Windwalker relies on 4 AoE spells and 2 single target spells for this setup, delivered in part by 3 pets. It doesn't feel good at all, it feels floaty. I don't feel like the source of this damage. It's rigid and unenjoyable to play, frustrating to play against, unfit for its fantasy, but fundamentally powerful. Though the nerfs in Season 3 saw Windwalker fall away a bit, the fundamental setup remains potent, and it's solely a numbers game. If Windwalker can reliably kill with a setup like this, it's going to be inherently strong. So that brings us to the Dragonflight talent trees. Really, like when asked what I wanted from Dragonflight, like what I wanted to see, the only thing I could really think of was to see Keepers and Bone Dust left behind in Shadowlands. I don't know anyone who vocally enjoys this build. I only see people mad about it on Twitter and mad about it in my fucking DMs as if it's my fault. Needless to say, I am immensely disappointed with the trees as they exist at the moment. Not only did Bone Dust and Keepers survive the transition, but the tree is littered with abilities that fit right into the Necro Windwalker archetype. Not only has Necro Windwalker survived, it has been emphasized in this talent tree. First thing to note, the critical tools of Necro Windwalker are all here. Dance of Chi-Ji survives, Mark of the Crane survives, Bone Dust survives, Keepers and Calculated Strikes survive. The only tool completely lost is Coordinated Offensive, which is a 10 to 20% damage bonus during Storm, Earth and Fire. On top of that, the talents that were formerly conduits are less powerful. Both of these are pretty significant nerfs, so it is conceivable that this setup won't exist in Dragonflight purely because of the numbers. My concern with that is that the Dragonflight tree introduces a huge amount of additional talents that neatly complement this archetype. The big one to jump out is Jade Ignition. This ability competed against Keepers at one point and could execute some very spooky spin setups of its own. Assuming this talent is tuned appropriately, that is to say, a talent worth taking for its own merit, that will go a long way to closing the gap that we just mentioned. Strike of the Windlord was an element of Windwalker setups in Legion. It is a 40-second cooldown, big punch with a 2 chi cost. In theory, it doesn't fit neatly into the setup because it's already so busy and expensive, but we gain Ascension and have a chance to receive chi from both RSK and Fist of Fury. So as far as I can tell, 1 chi from either of these talents is enough to add a Strike of the Windlord into the setup. Zuen's Battle Gear adds an additional crit chance to RSK after Fists. Between this and Keepers, it gives RSK 100% crit chance passively. The implications for that for gearing are hard to say at this point. It clearly devalues crit since RSK is a big bopper, but it's also only 1 source of damage out of like 5, so, you know, I don't know. Resonant Fists is intended to be like a bonus to cleave damage. It seamlessly fits into this model, but also it's sort of expensive to get to, and people are avoiding it in the builds that I've seen, so it's worth mentioning, but I don't know if it'll be central. And finally, we have Glory of the Dawn making a return, just in case, just in case the Warlocks or Rogues, in case you guys missed that one, this one's a little treat for you. It's hard to imagine a world where these talents taken in combination won't offset the damage loss between SL and Dragonflight and give Necro Windwalker a life after Shadowlands. My concern, however, is really that there's no clear alternative provided. Specs like Unholy Death Knight have clear archetypes favouring certain profiles of damage. You have the ability to imagine a pet-based build or a dot-based build. Windwalker's only obvious alternative archetype is a high-tempo build based around maximising Zuen uptime. Lots of uses of Zuen with Invoker's Delight for big haste and big brawling, where you're rewarded for consistent engagements. Like you've got the talents like Spiritual Focus and like lots of reward for staying in and punching things in the face. So a thing that you lack with Necro Windwalker currently. Builds of this nature have been played with throughout Shadowlands, a haste-filled rebellion against the rigid Necro build. However, as we saw in Shadowlands, these tempo builds have a hard time competing against the certainty and efficiency of Necro Windwalker. Monks who try to brawl in this way ultimately find themselves role-playing as shitty demon hunters or warriors. I don't want to write it off altogether because that would be absurd, but this is the only real alternative to a Dance, Bone Dust, Jade Ignition build, and it feels like well-trod ground. Like, I'm not hopeful that this is going to work. A key issue in the tree is the emphasis on Touch of Death. Again, I can understand where this came from. Touch of Death is fun, and in PvE sees a lot of use. There are interactions here that look quite fun in a Keystone, spamming an AoE Touch of Death multiple times on a pack of mobs, that sort of thing. However, in Arena, a Touch of Death should represent the end of the game. It is possible for you to whiff it or for the target to survive through enough DR, but if I'm pressing Todd consciously, my expectation is that it will kill the target and the other guys will leave the arena. Even worse than a 50% damage buff to Tiger Palm, these Touch of Death talents are as close to dead picks in Arena as I can imagine. I do not want 60 seconds off Todd in the context of a 2s match. I do not need to hit 5 targets with Todd in a 2s match. I need it to poop on the one guy. These talents litter the tree and only limit the alternatives to a Necro-alike build. My concern here is that Necro Windwalker is so tight and cuts so much fat from its playstyle that a lot of the interesting and fun talents on this tree are just non-starters. Like teaching in the monastery looks like a lot of fun, but doesn't actually have a place in this archetype. So a lot of the interesting stuff here is just cut in favor of pursuing this very singular idea. And that is my principal concern. That it's set, like Necro Windwalker set such a high watermark that anything interesting or fun put on this tree needs to be able to compete with this build, and that is just sort of too much to expect from fucking Fury of Zuen, right? This tree really demonstrates how vague Windwalker's class fantasy is now. The tree's 3 capstone archetypes are built around Bone Dust Brew, Zuen, and Nightface Stomp, with complementary meme lightning talent. The soul of the Dragonflight talent tree is AoE, Pets, and Touch of Death, and that fucking sucks. As the soul, I do think it is impossible to excise these issues in their entirety. Removing Bone Dust and Kiefer's wouldn't solve the issue. If Bone Dust turns out to not be any good, that doesn't solve the issue. Leg Sweep setups are endemic to the spec currently. Zwen's Battle Gear and Jade Ignition both play in the exact same way. Bone Dust and Kiefer's are just 2 more vectors by which Windwalkers cram lethal damage into 5 seconds. But I know I would prefer to one-shot a player with a single Rising Sun kick versus filling their deathlog with a million lines of pathetic spinning crane kick damage and Bone Dust procs. A massive kick to the head is at least closer to the theme. So yeah, I don't know what the solution is. Windwalker is ultimately a product of World of Warcraft as it currently exists. In Mists of Pandaria, Windwalker had a damage profile that was smooth, relying very little on cooldowns for its burst. That was a thing you could do back then. That is not the world we live in anymore. Something that I feel like I sort of drove too hard with this script, and I sort of want to back up a little bit, is that I'm not trying to speak out against setups as a concept. Obviously, you know, when you think of Windwalker, you think of the big Serenity bangs. That's actually quite a famous element. So a lot of people's favorite era with the spec was specifically the Serenity setups. So I'm not sitting here trying to advocate for setups to be removed and for us to go back to being perfectly linear. What I felt watching that old mop footage is that it did represent a far more engaging version of the rotation than this whole, you know, pet punching thing. One thing I do want to just sort of touch on, I couldn't articulate cleanly why I didn't feel like the modern leg sweep setup, like particularly Necro Windwalker specifically, it didn't feel in the spirit of the fighting game setup, and I couldn't quite articulate why. I think I do have it, and the big thing is that with Serenity, you've got the big cooldown reduction, and it's the idea of like you are running like a script that is like a fighting game sequence. So the whole idea is being able to get multiple RSKs in a 3-second, 5-second window, that sort of thing. And so you've got that model of damage. You've got this idea of very specific scripting of abilities, like having a combo, and then you have Necro Windwalker, which is as much, if not more, about the preamble. It's about punching the correct number of pets. It's about getting a proc beforehand, and the actual process of going through the burst setup itself is just spending the buttons in a linear order that you've already picked up elsewhere. So it is a setup. It is a combo in the broader sense of the word, but the spirit of it isn't quite right. So I guess if I were to try to make a suggestion, because initially the script was just kind of like, oh, here's a problem, and I just had a bit of a whinge. I would like to see Windwalker realigned such that there's a de-emphasis on the idea of just like carrying the procs into the setup. I'd rather us have to go the Serenity route of like, you know, you have your fighting game script of trying to get 2 Rising Sun kicks into the window of a leg sweep, and that's how you go about doing your damage. There is a aptitude to the go itself rather than just punching the correct number of times beforehand. Ultimately, I do hope that, like, you know, some of these builds that I've seen floating around on Twitter that don't use Bone Dust Brew, I hope those are the builds that we run. I sincerely hope that this video is just an overreaction, and I get to be made fun of in a year's time when bone dust is terrible and no one even looks at that side of the tree. But, you know, Mark of the Crane is out of here. Dance of Chi-Chi is out of here. And everyone's happy running around with Bond as Zuen. That's the world I want to live in. The concern, as I've added back earlier in the video, is that Necro Windwalker and just the efficiency of that style of damage sets such a high watermark that any alternative has to be really strong to offset it. Even like, you know, nerfed Necro Windwalker in Season 3, Season 4 is still a better spec than, you know, the Kyrian Windwalker or the, you know, the Zuen Battle Gear stuff. Ultimately, you play Necro Windwalker, and as Necro Windwalker has gotten nerfed, it's gotten worse, but it's found ways to survive by, you know, like with the 4-piece bonus, it was just now another element you had to plug into the setup. You now had to try to carry your stacks of 4-piece into the setup to then get your extra 20% damage, and that offset a lot of the nerfs to Windwalker. So Necro Windwalker, because it is fundamentally strong, it's sticky. It's hard to get rid of, and it's hard for anything else to compete with it. So I would prefer to see it just fucked off entirely, fucked off into the moon, as opposed to having to hope that the Zuen build, or like a high tempo Teaching of the Monastery, Spiritual Focus, like all those fun tempo talents. I want us to, like, you know, be able to run Serenity with the extending thing. I want us to be able to get 3 RSKs in a single Serenity. I want that world to exist, and the likelihood of that increases the less Necro Windwalker I see on that build, in my opinion. So that is all I've got for you. Hopefully you found that interesting. If so, God help you. I need to get back to work because I have 2 assignments due in a week, and I haven't started learning the material for either of them. I'm fucked. This is not good. I should not have made this. I'm sorry I'm not more active. I love you. I'm sorry that I made a video, and I'll see you when I inevitably make the next video. Bye.